I guess before we talk about the economy, we're obviously looking forward to the unveiling of the standing committee. And, you know, we won't really know until they come out on stage. But do we have any guesses on, I guess, how many they will be or the makeup? Do we get any changes in the composition?
Well, you know, there's no point in speculating on personnel changes because in the coming few days, we will learn who will be in the top leadership in China. But perhaps what's more important is the implications of the Party Congress for economic reform going forward. So if you look at Xi Jinping's speech in the last 2 days, you know, 3.5 hours, right, that can be looked at as a blueprint for the next 5 years. So he has laid out really the 2 centennial goals, making China a moderately prosperous society by 2021, but also making China a fully developed nation by 2040. These are long-range goals, which we all have to keep in mind, because the benefit of the Chinese leadership is that they can set long-term goals, as opposed to Western democracies where you change terms every 3 years to 4 years, and it's very hard to focus on long term. In contrast, in China, they're indeed focusing on the long term. And in the next 5 years, I think structural reform will be very central to China's economic development.
It really is the speed of those reforms that we're talking about. I mean, when you take a step back, what are we talking about here all the time? It's the Federal Reserve. It's the U.S. monetary policy that drives the global economic conversation. The PBOC, it does not have the same weight when it comes to those global conversations because it is a very restricted central bank, very insular looking, with that tight trading band. Eventually, if it's going to achieve that developed nation status, you know, it's got to loosen the reins of control.
Well, I think they will try to loosen the reins of control, but not in a very rapid fashion. It is going to happen gradually, step by step. But take a look at interest rates. I think the liberalization of interest rates has already taken place. Now, the next phase of reform will involve the reform of the currency, when capital account will be opened up. But importantly, in the nearer term, is the leverage ratio. So I just returned from the U.S. From a week of travel. A lot of the international investors have been very concerned about the leverage ratios, right? So rather encouragingly, in the first 9 months of this year, we're beginning to see the leverage ratio coming down slightly, ever so slightly. But nonetheless, we're seeing the situation becoming a little bit better.
Yeah, just to bring that up, we're essentially looking at 4 downward adjustments in the economy. There's a slightly cooling housing market. There's a little bit less spending when it comes to infrastructure. There's the financial deleveraging. And then the 4th, I guess it's the overcapacity problem, the supply side reform that's taking place. If we had to pick between the 4, would any one of those things be disruptive or potentially disruptive?
Well, so far, all those reforms have been undergoing for the past couple of years. They actually have not been so disruptive because the new economy sectors in China, from the internet to the services to consumption, to the new whole initiative involving the Greater Bay Area in Shenzhen, Guangzhou, those have been powering the economy forward. So even though the traditional industries are undergoing some painful structural reforms, the new economy sectors continue to prop up growth rates. So I don't anticipate those reforms that you mentioned to be disruptive to growth rates. We may see growth rates moderate slightly in the coming year. However, I think the quality of the growth should improve going forward.
Where are those gold coins in that speech that was close to, what, 4 hours from Xi Jinping? You said that it is a roadmap. It is a clear direction that China's going in. We saw the pop-up in environmental stocks. Where else were those gold coins for investors?
Upgrading for China's manufacturing capacity. So this is very much in line with China's 2025 initiative, right? So in addition to China's overall broad economic goals, Xi Jinping has set out goals for upgrading industrial infrastructure, industry capabilities. Basically, China is going to be a powerful manufacturing center, not just for low-end goods, but actually Internet Plus. They're going to look at artificial intelligence. They're going to look at big data to power the economy forward. So I see a clear message about industrial upgrading and really leading China to be an industrial, not just industrial powerhouse, but also technological powerhouse.
One of the priorities which I got from the speech on Wednesday was the re-strengthening of the state-owned sector, which to me seems like we're turning the clock back to the 80s when we had a two-track economy. There's obviously some value in doing that. I just don't understand what that is. Help us understand what the value is.
In terms of the state-owned enterprises, right, they still command a very important role in the Chinese economy. But that role has actually been diminishing relative to the private sector. So I think the next phase involving SOE reform will be mixed ownership reform. For example, we recently had a Unicom reform with 10 major shareholders now being involved outside of the state sector. We also see mergers and acquisitions in the state-owned sector. We're seeing basically they're creating conglomerates among the Chinese state-owned enterprises to make them not just nationally competitive, but globally competitive. So the role of SOEs will not be reduced per se, but they have to be upgraded, strengthened, and made more competitive so that they can become global champions.
That is a really great point. Jing Ulrich, we always appreciate your
candor
and your insight when it comes to China. JPMorgan Chase there, MD and Vice Chairman of Asia Pacific.